Schwab reached the peak of his fame in 1917, 1918, around the time the United States entered the First World War. He was declared the Director General of the Emergency Fleet, which was responsible for maintaining steel output. And at that time, he was praised for his public contributions to the war effort, turning out thousands and thousands of ton of steel a year for the shipbuilding for the Navy. As with the fortunes of the United States, they were quickly about to turn for the worse with the stock market crash in 1929. Schwab, who was always a very, 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 very big spender, he was already on the verge of bankruptcy himself at the time, and his investments took a hit across the board. Schwab was very well known for his generous nature, which ultimately was to contribute to his ruinous financial circumstances as the 1930s progressed. He was known for his large charitable giving throughout his life, donating an auditorium to Penn State campus in 1903, I believe, called Schwab Auditorium, and then as recently as Schwab Hall on St. Francis's campus in 1931. He was always big on contributions, but often didn't have the necessary resources to fund them after the fact, as was to be the case with St. Francis's Schwab Hall. But Schwab was a big spender in his home. Schwab, from 1929 onwards, received his fortunes took a turn for the worse, with many investments going under during the stock market crash. Schwab, an optimist by nature, believed that his fortunes would rebound, but unfortunately, a lifetime of heavy spending took its toll on his surviving income. And as the decade rolled on, he was unable to meet financial commitments he had made in years prior. There's even a letter dating from 1936 from the then president of the University of St. Francis University, his alma mater, then St. Francis College, who was asking for Schwab to make good on a promise he had made to build a library. Schwab wrote back saying, unfortunately, circumstances could not allow him to donate at that time. And unfortunately, as Schwab grew older, his impact in Bethlehem still began to wane. And by 1936, he was practically just a figurehead on the Bethlehem board. And then also in March of that year, his mother, Pauline, finally died at the age of 93. Schwab, then 72, was heartbroken, and he never quite got over that loss. And then by 1939, it began on a very bad note. His wife, Raina, 55 years, died in January, and at the funeral, he said to a relative, "Look at me now for all we did within the year. A man knows when he's tired of living." And, in fact, he was dead within the year. That following spring and summer, he went to Europe one last time, and his health took a turn for the worse in London, and he escaped Europe on one of the last ships before Hitler declared war. Before the Allies declared war, Hitler invaded Poland, arriving home on August 31st, 1939, being carried off the ship, and he was to die 3 weeks later. And Schwab's name has been obscured by the fact he never left any great... One of the great tragedies of Schwab's life is the fact that he never donated much while he was alive. Unlike Carnegie and Frick, Schwab spent for pleasure, building large mansions throughout Pennsylvania and New York. His home in New York was one full block called Riverside. It took dozens and dozens of servants to run. It had a 2-story organ in it. And just the sheer cost of upkeep, let alone the cost it took to furnish it, could have been better spent building his legacy elsewhere. So as it was said, once of another great architect, and Schwab was one he changed the world of business forever. If you seek his monument, look around you in a city, because Bethlehem beam, the steel that he helped to mastermind, is still very much with us today, although Schwab's memory is not. Charles Schwab was an incredible man. A man from humble origins. He eventually met kings and queens and even had an audience with his parents and the Pope. Schwab was just really like no other. As it was said before, born in 1862, died in 1939. He lived 77 very productive years. And then by the time of his 70th birthday in 1933, he was looking back and he said, here I am, a jack of all trades. Typically men of his sort were failures. Why he wasn't, he could not understand. Which, though, Schwab was a little fanciful with the record. But the record does clearly show that Schwab was a man of extraordinary ability. From Loretto, Pennsylvania to New York to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, he made his mark on the world.